Welcome to Arts, Work, Life, a podcast from the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. I am your host, Claire Caulfield.
I'm Jenny Thomas, executive producer.
This is Season 5, Episode 3, Health and Healing. And we decided to do a whole episode on these topics because over the years, there have been so many stories about health and healing because they speak to the highs and lows of this industry and just the human experience in general.
That's right, Claire. Arts contribute to a healthy society, and more we're recognizing the importance of the arts in healthcare and wellness. So I'm really excited that we're highlighting the stories that show the healing power of the arts.
Including just some really tear-jerking and feel-good stories about the incredible connections, growth, and sometimes, yes, literal physical healing that occurs thanks to the performing arts. So let's start with a story that beautifully brings together physical, emotional, and spiritual healing.
We chose to replay Julián Silva's story because of how it demonstrates how the arts can really break through in settings where nothing else can.
But first, let me reintroduce Julián. He moved from Colombia to Louisiana when he was 4 years old. There weren't many other Latinos where he lived, but music helped him stay connected to his heritage and Colombian culture. Julián spent hundreds of hours playing music, and after college, he started a band. The band found success with great gigs, and they even recorded a few albums. But he felt like something was missing from this experience. So he pivoted and put his degree in psychology to work and enrolled in a music therapy program at NYU. Here's Julián.
With music therapy, it was interesting because a lot of the people that I worked with were not musical. They were not musicians. They were not people who sometimes ever even touched an instrument before. And it dawned on me, I realized that what I was listening to was their true expression through these instruments. They weren't worried about techniques. They weren't worried about scales on a piano. They were just playing what they felt. And a part of me was very jealous because every time I approached an instrument, it was always the technique, the scale, how well I can play it. And I wanted to get back to a point where I just let it flow freely out of me. And music therapy has allowed me to do that, not only with myself, to work on myself with that, but also with other people. When I left New York City and moved to California, I got a job at a children's hospital. It's a largely Latino community. There are a lot of immigrant children at the hospital and families that don't speak English. And I've always had a passion for working with these patients. About 3 years ago, I was approached by a fellow coworker who asked me to help co-treat a new patient. All I knew about him was that at the time he was 17 years old. He had immigrated from Central America to the United States as an unaccompanied minor. He had no family in the United States or here in California. He was a farm worker. I knew that the diagnosis was acute flaccid myelitis, which is a rare condition that affects the spinal cord. So when you have this condition, it causes an extreme weakness in the arms and legs, sometimes causing paralysis. And when I introduced myself in Spanish, his smile got even bigger because not only was I a Spanish-speaking music therapist, but I was also a male provider. And working at a children's hospital, believe it or not, there are not a lot of male providers. So sometimes we get cases where we have these teenage boys who are really reserved. They want to say things, but they don't feel comfortable. And sometimes if I walk into a room, they open up. And he starts telling me about using headphones during his physical therapy sessions, listening to reggaeton to help him through some of the painful procedures that he had to go through, especially with his condition. He's trying to move his muscles more, his arms and his legs. And sometimes that can cause some pain. And he would describe using reggaeton on his earphones to kind of drown out some of the pain and to kind of focus on just the beats of the music. We thought about songwriting, which is something else that we use, another intervention that we use with a lot of patients where we introduce writing their own original songs to help them express how they're feeling. And sometimes it's easier to do that than actually just talking about our feelings. He shared a song called Home Run by an Argentinian artist called Paulo Alondra. And he shared that song, and that song was very powerful. And he explained to us how important that song was for him and how deeply it resonated with him, that we thought, wow, okay, what if we use the beats to this song and write your own lyrics to it? I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. He talked about his journey from Central America. He described it being a 45-day trip on the top of a train, and him describing losing friends on the journey, some of the things that he experienced physically and emotionally throughout that journey. And listening to stories like this, it's heavy. It's heavy, and sometimes you carry these things with you. As an immigrant to this country myself, not being able to speak the language, I couldn't imagine what he was feeling and what he was dealing with being alone in this country, working as much as he was at the time, and now facing this medical crisis by himself, not being able to understand what everybody was saying because he didn't speak English. I gotta remind you, he's just a 17-year-old boy who is very friendly, but cautious at the same time about trust. I remember when we first started writing lyrics, he would always ask me to hide his lyric sheet from the providers, so nobody would ever see it. He was very reserved about his story and about his feelings. So sometimes when we were doing songwriting or thinking about ideas, providers would walk into the room. He would immediately stop, change the subject, and go into something else. So it was important for us to support that, to make sure that we honor his privacy. The lyrics were about him leaving his family and how the medical condition that he was now facing had impacted him. And despite everything that he had been going through and has gone through, it was a song about hope. It was a song about being grateful, about not only the care that he was receiving, but the love that he was receiving from everybody. And then last line that he added to the song was, voy a volver a caminar, which means I'm going to walk again. Which was a very powerful way of ending that. Because again, this was a kid who was paralyzed at one moment, couldn't use his hands, his legs. He couldn't walk. And he was really motivated to do this. So that was powerful when he said, voy a volver a caminar. And at the end of the song, he wrote a whole verse in English to his providers, to his nurses, to his doctors, to his PTs, saying, thank you for helping me. Thank you for caring about me. After we finished the song, we recorded him on GarageBand singing. And after it was done, he listened to it and he said, is it okay if I share it? And I said, that's completely up to you. Who do you want to share it with? And he said, maybe with my nurses and the people who take care of me. And we were able to share that on the day that he was being discharged. We had a little party for him and invited all the providers. Obviously, there was not a dry eye in the entire hospital after watching this video. It was so powerful. And for him, it was very empowering to be able to tell his story, tell it in a way that he wanted to tell his story. So when I saw the opportunity to join the podcast, I reached out to him and I asked if it was okay for me to share this story. And he was very excited that his story was going to be shared, that people were going to listen to it and hopefully find motivation to continue in their paths despite any obstacles. And really using this song and his experience as a way of motivating others. There's always those patients that kind of stay with us. He taught me a lot, not only about myself, but as a musician and as a music therapist. He taught me so much. It's important to tell his story because it shows how awesome and powerful music can be. To have an individual who has gone through such difficult physical trauma, emotional trauma, and to be able to use music to process those feelings is something that's amazing to me.
I mean, every time I re-listen to that story, I cry. And, you know, that's why I wanted to feature it again this year. But Jenny, what was your reason?
I mean, Claire, this story is so powerful.
Yeah.
This boy is so alone, and he's suffering paralysis and a language and cultural barrier. And, you know, Julián is a Latino immigrant working in healthcare. You know, he's a lifeline. And the music also becomes this language of healing between the two of them. And, you know, even more heartwarming was that Julián let us know that this young man was so excited to hear that Julián was submitting the story to the podcast.
Right.
So it really, really means that a lot to us to share this story again.
Yeah, and that really was just icing on the cake, right? Yeah. Like, you know, it was amazing that he had this great recovery, but then to hear that he wanted his story shared and we were help amplifying that was just so special to be a small part in this very important story. So yes, on to the next important story is also about someone who found their voice through music. Azadi Amaan.
Yeah, Claire, this story stuck in people's minds because you can hear how Azadi, who has a speech impediment, connects to their true self through music. Music is their voice, and that becomes very clear in this story.
Yeah, so in Azadi's story, they share that some of their earliest memories are of their grandmother at the piano. As a young child, Azadi would sit on the piano bench, feet dangling, transfixed as their grandmother's hands danced across the keyboard. So here's Azadi.
Music has been a big part of my life even before I could speak. I was born at 1 pound 11 ounces, so super premature, really tiny. What the doctors did was they did a surgery where they took a piece of my rib and put it in my throat to prop my airway open. And the great news was that that surgery worked, and I was able to come off of a respirator and breathe normally. The bad news with that was that the surgery damaged the nerves on my tongue and my face, and so that made learning how to speak really challenging. So literally, like, I started playing the piano before I could speak.
As a teenager, Azadi started with a new piano teacher that didn't share their grandmother's focus on learning songs for fun.
In the classical music world, there's the idea of things have to be done a certain way, and there's certain rules that need to be followed, and there's not necessarily a lot of flexibility for artistry or creativity or self-expression, depending on who you're studying with or how you're approaching learning music. And with this particular teacher, it was very much by the book.
This new teacher was incredibly strict and said that Azadi's inability to read music must mean that they didn't take piano all that seriously.
It was painful because music, up until that point, had been such an integral part of who I was and how I expressed myself. Music really, was my voice and allowed me to express my deepest emotions, especially when I didn't necessarily have words to articulate what I was feeling.
This rigid focus on classical training and insistence that there was only one correct way to approach piano eventually pushed Azadi away from music altogether. They quit playing the piano, graduated high school, and enrolled in college as a psychology major.
One night, one fall, I was studying for finals in my apartment that was on campus and was feeling really overwhelmed, and the music building was a fairly short walk away. So I put my coat on and walked across campus and got into the music building and sat down at a piano and just played. Just improvised for hours. And the music just pour it out of me. It was like it had never left.
Playing music again after years away from the keys was transformative. Azadi started playing small performances and then started teaching piano lessons. It was then that Azadi met a student named Taylor, who reminded Azadi a lot of themselves at that age. Taylor loves piano but has dyslexia and was struggling to progress.
With my background in psychology, I have always been super interested in figuring out what makes people tick and how their brains work. And through getting to know Taylor, we were able to do some experiments and tried a couple of different things. And the thing that we finally landed on was adding color to each of the notes on the staff.
Using their research skills, knowledge of psychology, and a lot of patience, Azadi was able to craft a system for Taylor to read music.
It struck a chord with me to have the ability to sit with someone through their struggle and then support them and guide them to a solution that really worked for their brain and to empower them. It was really emotional, and it made me wish that I could give that same experience to the younger me. I have this underlying fear that I'm not a real or valid musician because I don't read music. And I think that if there had been someone along the way to be like, hey, that's okay. There's multiple paths to being a musician. That could have been really transformative. Late one night, I couldn't sleep. And I went down an internet rabbit hole researching dyslexia and music. And I figured out that I have a form of dyslexia that makes it really challenging for me to read music. I've known that I have neurodivergencies for a long time and have kind of stuffed them away or tried to hide them. And I think that there's real power in owning that and really naming and loving that part of myself. I recorded an improv album last year, and I'm starting to release singles from that. I'm getting choked up just thinking about it, honestly. I think that the song that most embodies that is Freedom Beckons. Freedom Beckons is an improvised piece that really plays with the tension between feeling stuck and what happens if you take that leap and trust. And I feel like by being more open about my neurodivergence and my own journey, that in some ways freedom is tugging and calling at me.
So what really struck chord with me in that piece was Azadi's creativity and how they used, their own health problems and dyslexia. It actually empowered them to help their students and heal their relationship with music, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. They had such an epiphany about being dyslexic and neurodiverse, and it took feeling like they didn't measure up to traditional standards, but then healing through helping their student, and that allowed them to acknowledge and embrace their true selves. And that is the healing in this story.
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm. And another beautiful and impactful story about healing is a favorite from last season, Jeff Corle.
Oh my gosh, his cows.
I
love imagining him with his cows. And so you really feel for him in this story, and you'll hear more about what we mean by his cows.
Yeah,
in a moment.
Yeah, because Jeff grew up on a dairy farm in Pennsylvania. And this farm had been passed down from father to son for 4 generations. However, Jeff's family farm, like many farms across the country, faced financial hardships. And in 2022, his farm was one of the thousands across the country that shuttered operations. Here's Jeff with what happened next.
This is a very difficult time for small farmers in our country. Very difficult to make the numbers work. So that's what happened to us. We just faced economic factors beyond our control that we couldn't overcome. So in the spring of 2022, I made the very difficult and painful decision to shut down the farm, which meant having to sell our cows. And of all the aspects of farming, the thing that I loved most was my cows and the relationship with my cows. And I often say that you're talking to a guy who has had more in-depth, meaningful conversations with cows than he's ever had with most human beings. So when it came time to say goodbye to them, that was the single hardest thing I ever faced in my life. And in the aftermath of that, I was very heartbroken, sank into a depression, and in the midst of that heartache and pain, I turned to that old friend for comfort and relief, my guitar. And through tears, I just poured my heart out into writing this song called Empty Barn.
And I can get used to not needing to bale hay. And I can get used to a job off the farm. But I will never get used to this empty barn.
And so I really only wrote the song in an effort to get all those pent-up emotions out and to try to feel better. And if left to my own devices, that's probably as far as it would have gone. But I played it for a friend, and she convinced me to put it up on my farm's Facebook page and make it available for download. So I just made a simple guitar vocal smartphone recording and put it up there, and was shocked to see that a couple of hours later it had been downloaded like 300 times and then 1,000 times. It just kept going and going and going. What was even more remarkable than that was that along with all those downloads came the most wonderful comments of love, support, and encouragement, mostly from complete strangers. And, I always say that writing Empty Barn was that therapeutic, cathartic experience, but getting all of those wonderful comments is really what started my healing journey.
Empty barn, empty heart. I should have known right from the start. Dreams will only take you so far.
And it was within about 6 weeks of writing Empty Barn that I ended up in an iconic Nashville recording studio. So the producer asked me if there was anybody, when we were lining up the musicians to play, he asked me if there was anyone specifically. I was a fan of a gal named Tammy Rogers, who's kind of known as one of the best bluegrass fiddlers in the country. And so I just threw it out there, and he laughed and he said, okay, that's great. And he said, but, Tammy is one of the most in-demand studio musicians in Nashville. She tours extensively. You're never going to get her, and even if you could, you couldn't afford her. And I said, well, would you reach out to her and tell her what the song is about and what I'm trying to do? And he said, yeah, I can do that, but, don't hold your breath. It was like 3 days later, I got a text from him all in caps, "We got Tammy." And really, I don't want to put too much on this idea of fate, these things and how the stars lined up. But had Tammy not been on that session, we would probably have a totally different track. And Tammy's playing absolutely makes the song.
Empty barn.
So once I had a professional recording of Empty Barn, I made it my mission to make a music video for the song. And so I asked on social media for farmers to send me pictures of their own dairy barn life and of their own dairy cows. It turned out I got pictures, hundreds of pictures from all over the country. And it's those pictures that really make the video so incredibly personal and powerful and poignant. And that really propelled things forward. From getting all the press and the virality of the video, I was able to put together a tour, and it just kind of evolved into being able to do it full time and professionally. So one day in those early days, phone rings. It's a lady identifies herself as an administrator at a major hospital chain. She said, "We would like you to come speak to our staff for our Mental Health Awareness Day." And this is honestly what I said to her 100% truthfully. I said to her, "I'm sorry, you have the wrong person. I'm not a speaker and I don't have anything to do with mental health." And the lady laughed and she said, "I've been following your story from the beginning. Your story has everything to do with mental health." And so I thought about it and I agreed to do it under one condition. And that was that I could have my guitar with me. And it turned out that that talk was a really big hit. After I got over my nerves of doing it, I thought, hey, that's something that, you really can relate to the audience and really get your message across. And so since then, I've developed this thing called a keynote concert where I tell my story and incorporate some of my songs that help tell the story. So there's this organization called the National Farmers Organization, and I was doing their annual conference. Well, while I was speaking, I noticed that there was a big guy, and this guy was in bib overalls and a baseball hat. And I noticed that seemed like he was starting to get emotional when I was telling the story. And then once I started singing Empty Barn, he had tears, in his eyes. And on one hand, it kind of really freaked me out because I like to make eye contact with the audience. And the fact that this big guy was, starting to cry, it just... I'll get emotional about it now talking about it, but it ended up that I had to kind of look away because it was affecting me, to that extent. But at any rate, I finished the show, went out to my table. People were in line to meet me, and this guy was in line. Now, I'm 6'2", so I'm a pretty big guy. This guy was like towering over me. And when I reached out to shake his hand, he grabbed me in a bear hug and literally lifted me off the ground, like lifted my feet up off of the ground and set me down and lifted me up off the ground again. And the second time he did, my hat flew off. And while he was doing that, he was saying to me, "That's the greatest effing song ever," except he was really saying the word. So anyway, about the time I thought I was going to pass out, he released me from the bear hug, and I looked at him and I said, "Wow, what's going on, man?" He told me that he had grown up on a dairy farm. His family made the decision to go out of business and sell their cows when he was a senior in high school. And he had always dreamed and planned that he would take over the farm one day. So when his family decided to go out of business, he was just devastated. But at the time, he had to be the strong one in the family. So he, in fact, had to be involved with arranging the sale and doing all this stuff to get ready and not show them, how much it was also affecting him. And he was now in his mid-30s, and he told me that he never told anyone, not his parents, not his wife, not any of his friends, how much that loss had meant to him. And he told me that that was the first day he had ever cried about his loss. I sold my cows and was heartbroken and depressed. To me, that was a Jeff Corle crisis. But sadly, there are just thousands upon thousands of farmers across our country going through the same type of pain from the loss of their operation, being a small or a mid-sized dairy farmer, or a small or a mid-sized crop operation or poultry operation or whatever. It's all being taken over by large-scale mega corporate farm type things. And it's changed so fast. It's happened in the last, roughly 20 to 30 years. It's given rise to this farmer mental health crisis. There's a statistic that says that farmers commit suicide at a rate 3 times higher than the average. Something like 92% of farmers report experiencing stress, anxiety, and depression on a weekly basis, because even farms that continue on, profit margins are razor thin. If you're at the mercy of the weather, machinery breakdowns, any number of things, let alone the idea that, hey, you might knock your brains out to put this crop in and you might lose money on it. So this farmer mental health crisis has come about, and I learned about it through Empty Barn and through being asked to speak, and especially in my keynote concert, I really emphasize the mental health aspects of my story. And I really bare my soul to say, this is what happened to me, and this is how I was able to move forward.
If I dwell for too long, it'll bring the tears. I can't believe it's over after all these years.
Guys that look like me were brought up to grin and bear it. That's just all there is to it. They're going to keep that stuff inside. And if I can do anything, it's to say, look, here's what I did. I wrote a song. I played that song for someone as my cry for help. And you don't have to write a song, but by God, you can reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm going through something. I need to talk to you about it.
That is such an important message, and one that I'm just so glad we're able to shine a light on again in 2026.
Claire, I don't think we've ever had a former farmer as part of APAP, at least as far as I know. At least on the podcast, but I'm really glad to have been able to feature a rural artist.
Yeah, rural art is so important, and it's another great reminder that you do not have to live in a city to be an artist.
So true. So true.
Yeah. And Jenny, you recently caught up with Jeff when he was not in a city. So let's see the update from Jeff in 2026.
Jeff, you're in your home office or in your studio. Where are you?
Yeah, I am in my what I call my quasi-tour vehicle. So I'm out on the road today. And so, yes, I'm coming to you live from someplace in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Awesome. That's great. Well, we wanted to capture the life of an artist, and that truly is what we're seeing right here. What have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I usually end up with a lot of speaking engagements over the winter time. So last fall, I did a tour, kind of a nice little Midwestern tour that incorporated what I call a barn concert. So a barn concert is like a living room concert, people who do shows in people's living rooms, except as the name implies, we do them in barns. And we had such a wonderful time at that barn concert, and I got just the most powerful testimonials from farmers. And this friend of mine said, you need to do a national tour of barn concert. And I laughed about it, said, yeah, that's really interesting. And this friend of mine just lit a fire under my butt. She's helped me organize it. So after I got through all my speaking engagements over the winter, we really started planning in earnest for what we're calling the Barnstorming Tour of America.
I was thinking that would be the theme.
And The blurb about it is this. So here's your scoop. I will be going coast to coast, playing exclusively on farms to raise money and awareness for farmer mental health issues and initiatives.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing.
Yes, this summer. So the tour will be July through September. So July, August, September this summer, 2026. And all of our hosts are volunteers. They're just folks who are farmers, who have farms and will open their barns for us to come do a show. And at this point in time, we have like 26 hosts lined up. So I'm going to be very busy. The other thing I want to mention about that is I'm partnering with a wonderful nonprofit called Rural Minds, and their whole thing is to provide mental health services for farming community and rural communities all across the country. So we're partnering on the tour to actually bring awareness and bring services that meet the people where they are.
And our next story is dedicated to anyone having a bad day, because our next storyteller, Maura Garcia, she has been there. In the February before season 3 premiered, Maura Garcia was having just the absolute worst week. She had to back out of an exciting 9-month dance contract due to a scheduling conflict. Then she and her partner of 3 years broke up, and Maura was in the middle of moving into an Airbnb when she developed a fever. Here's Maura with what happened next.
I just kept on getting sicker and sicker. My fever did not go away and got to 104.5, which don't ever let your fever get to that point, but it's a very dangerous point and awful things can start going wrong in the body. And the culmination of that was that I had a febrile seizure. And because of the seizure, I ended up breaking my leg. And I was in an Airbnb and I was sharing it with someone. And when I had the seizure, I made so much noise that, the other person rushed out of their room and asked me if I wanted them to call 911. And I was on the floor. I couldn't move. And I said, well, if I'm not okay in 5 to 6 minutes, we'll think about it. And I had been trying to be small and not problematic, which now I kind of laugh at it. Obviously, it was not funny at the time, but, I didn't want to bother anybody and ended up having a huge, loud banging and clattering of body parts against hard surfaces in the kitchen, which, of course, was a lot more noise. And so when I finally gained more consciousness, then I dragged myself up the stairs and convinced myself that maybe it was all going to fix itself in the morning. Nothing was fixed in the morning. My leg was huge, swollen. I still had a fever. And at that point, it was actually being a dancer that made me take action. I thought to myself, well, you hear about people having injuries and then they keep on going and it turns out being a permanent injury. And if they would have had it taken care of, it would have been fine. And I said, you don't want this to stop you from dancing. So that's what made me go to the hospital.
Maura called a friend to drive her to the hospital, but it was a frigid winter day and the sidewalk in front of the Airbnb was completely iced over.
So I put those reusable plastic bags on the floor and I set my butt on the plastic bags and I scooted myself on the ice to the car. So in that moment, I was giggling, because even though I hurt and this was like kind of an awful situation, it was funny.
Maura ended up having to have surgery on her leg and then moved home to North Carolina to recover.
Now, once I started feeling a little better, that was the difficult part. Among physical therapists, is some saying, if you ask any athlete which is worse with an injury, the pain or the muscle loss, people will say the muscle loss. And so I started thinking of all these ways to train and work out and move that would not make me be on my feet. I started inventing these movements to get around. I had a kind of rowing movement. Imagine if you are sitting on your butt with your legs out in front of you and you put your hands behind you and then you push. So I would do that sometimes. To get off the floor, I would do a type of flip over with my leg in the air, and then I would push up and walk back into downward dog and do all of these maneuvers. I had a 3-legged bear crawl that I did, and so that's where it started. And sometimes I would get tired and I just sit there and be on the ground. And when you're close to the ground, you see a lot more than when standing up. I started really thinking about the movements that happen underground. I wanted to incorporate the movements that I had created while injured and start thinking about how that might correlate with beings moving under the ground, with the way that the water moves under the ground, with the way that roots might cross. So all of those things really interested me, and I ended up making a dance film about those ideas. And the name of it was called Hawin Titla, which means in Cherokee language, underneath. And I spent 2 weeks looking at all of these themes, looking at all of these ideas, playing with the movement, exploring the movement, and then another week in studio with the dancers.
Maura incorporated that plastic bag scoot, rowing, and three-legged bear crawl into the final film, and found that the constraints of her injury actually sparked joy and innovation.
It has really been beautiful to have this time of exploration of these movements created while injured, these ideas of the underground time all explored around the same time that I was starting to walk and make my way towards a full recovery. If the injury had not happened, some of the movements would never occur to me as interesting or dance-worthy. Something else that I learned is the importance of really listening to body signals. As a dancer, people always say, oh, you're very in tune with your body. And yes, part of what being a trained dancer can mean that you are conscious of every movement, but there is another type of body information that unfortunately a lot of us in the performing arts are taught to ignore. The pain, the tiredness, the exhaustion, and discomfort. The show must go on, the show must go on. However, at what expense? And so I really became aware that there were body signals that I was not listening to. So paying attention to the signals, that I'm receiving from every part of my body is something that I have tried to embrace more. And it's something that I would love to see other people in the industry be able to embrace more, as well as the people who are in control of directing, running rehearsals, embrace that as well. It was a hard lesson, but important lesson.
So self-care has become like this buzzword, and I especially hate when companies use it like in advertising, like buying yourself a latte is actually self-care. Horrible. And so one of the beautiful things about Maura's story are the insights she has about actual true self-care.
She learns the hard way for sure. But I love the way that she talks about body signals, because it's really important advice that we all must listen to our bodies. Right. I mean, her story is so visceral. The fact that she's on the floor, oh my God. I mean, she doesn't know that she's broken her leg and doesn't want to trouble her flatmate, and then waits until the next morning to go to the doctor. It's all just so crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jenny, you recently sat down with Maura, right?
I did. And so here's Maura with an update about her health and an exciting new career move.
Something that I realized was that part of my body was telling me, don't do this by yourself. Stop doing things by yourself. Ask for help, become part of something larger and embrace that. And so actually what I have been doing is I've been founding a company. So I've just founded a company. It's called Another World is Possible, and I'm in the process of bringing other people on board so that we can move forward together as an entity rather than a solo performer, independent artists. So, yeah.
That's very exciting.
It is exciting. Yes.
And tell us more about that. Does it integrate anything? What about healing and health and wellness does that reflect to you?
Well, to me, it reflects to this idea that if we are going to be liberated together, and if we're going to heal together, we need to work together in a sustainable way. It's not disconnected from our bodies, because, if one of us is completely stressed out from trying to dance, perform, write emails, pitch, that's bad for the community, because we are community members. It's bad for the work, it's bad for the individual. So to me, working together, creating together is an extension of caring for one another, which is that kind of deep care, to me, is the foundation of liberation.
And Maura, how are you doing physically? How is your health?
Actually, I'm glad you said that, because in talking about listening to the body, something that I really learned, and I think it's probably a problem in the larger dance field, just due to the lack of support, is that we have little muscles and we have large muscles, and a lot of the times we're depending on those large muscles to do things, and momentum and technique and skill. But there's some smaller muscles that need attention. And it's something that I learned about actually doing PT, that I was not as strong as I thought I was, because I was ignoring the small, repetitive, boring type of reparative work. And, for example, a professional football player, a basketball player, they have an entire team. Even some well-funded ballet companies will have their PT or physio that is always working, with their dancers. But if you're a freelancer, that doesn't often happen. Maybe you're lucky if you can go once a year. And so through the process of being injured and very luckily being able to be under the care of a physical therapist, I learned these little tiny muscles and these small little movements. It's like if you're building something, if you're a carpenter and you keep on not measuring correctly and in the end everything's off, that's kind of how those small movements and small muscles are. So that has been invaluable, and I think really has made me a stronger person and a stronger dancer, because I've now integrated basically kind of PT training, restorative training into my training every day.
And that is all the time we have for today, but we trust you'll love the next episode of Arts, Work, Life, because we're exploring the importance of trust in the arts.
See you then.
Arts, Work, Life is a production from APAP, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the storytellers and not necessarily those of APAP. APAP is the national service organization for the performing arts presenting, booking, and touring industry. You can join APAP at apap365.org. I'm Claire Caulfield, your host and producer. Jenny Thomas is our amazing executive producer, and we always want to give a shout out to Grace Soucion. Music today was provided by Blue Dot Sessions, Jeff Corle, Azadi Amaan, and Maura Garcia. This podcast would not be possible without the generous support of the Wallace Foundation, so thank you. Other thank yous to the APAP staff and board of directors, and of course our storytellers and the hundreds of thousands of arts workers all across the world. Your stories matter, and arts workers are essential. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we suggest sending it to someone who could use a little extra health and healing right now.
Arts, work, life. That's real.